Hello and welcome to the garden. Well, it's a bit of a moody day today, but I need to get started with some potatoes. Now, normally we make a really early batch and we'll kick them off probably around about the start of February with the idea that we'll get our first batch of new potatoes at the end of April. And we do manage that every year. We try that and it's great, but I didn't get around to them this year, and also it's been really cold. Now, we can get away with such an early start by using the greenhouses, and they're up against the south-facing wall, keeps them nice and warm during the daytime. So they will grow very happily, actually, even early in the year. You've just got to keep the frost away from them overnight, and it has been really cold this year. So for those reasons, we haven't started them yet. So we've had the tubers for a little while, and as a consequence, they now have nice big chits on them. Now, you don't, strictly speaking, you don't need to chit them. You could just plant the tubers and they would get going eventually, but there's no reason not to. So while I've been waiting for the time and the slightly warmer conditions to arrive, we've just left these in a cool place but well lit, and they produce these wonderful strong chits. So I'm very happy with these. Now, this variety is Arran Pilot, and well, of course, it depends on one's taste, but to my taste, this is one of the finest flavoured of the first earlies. Absolutely delicious. The tubers are, let me pick another one. I mean, here's one with, well, it's got three very nice chits on it, but as you can see, that is a rather lumpy shaped tuber. They're not the most pretty tubers, but they are one of the most delicious, and that is the main thing. These are fantastic. I love this variety. Now, I will be potting these up mostly into 15 litre pots. That's what we usually do our first batch in. Marginally bigger than a builder's bucket, that sort of size. But I've also got some 25 litre pots, and I'll probably put 5 of those out as well because I've got more tubers than I need here. But I will be reusing my old compost. So this has grown potatoes and peppers and such things before, and excuse me, it's perfectly all right to reuse old potting compost. You don't want to be having to buy bags and bags of the stuff every season, provided that there are no pests and diseases that remain in the soil to bother your plants the following year. So for potatoes, of course, we often get some blight. We won't get blight on these young ones, but blight isn't a problem because it doesn't remain in the soil. It needs living tissue to survive. So if you've got blight on some pots of potatoes, perfectly all right to reuse the compost next year. But there are other things, and I think potato blackleg is one of them, that can remain in the soil, and then you don't want to use it. You certainly don't want to use it again for potatoes and related plants. Of course, you could spread that old compost on a bed or use it for something completely different. It's fine, but reusing compost, at least for some years, is perfectly okay, so long as you don't get those particularly nasty pests or diseases that stay in the soil. But it does need to be reinvigorated. If you keep putting these potato tubers in old soil without doing something to it, obviously they're not going to be happy. And very often when you see this, it's done by just chucking a handful of feed in, and you can do that, of course, but when you're adding that feed, you're providing some nutrient for the plant, but you're not necessarily improving the compost itself. So I always like to add some fresh organic matter into that old compost. And I've got a couple of materials here that I'm going to use as the basis for these potato pots. I've got some sieved, slightly sandy loam. That came out of one of our beds here when we were working. We were taking some of the stones out, because we're in an area where you used to have gravel pits, so the soil when it's unimproved is very stony. So we took quite a bit out of the fruit cage when we prepared that a couple of seasons ago. Anyway, I've sieved the stones out and I'm left with a barrow full of sandy loam. On its own, it's not ideal, but mixed with some other ingredients, it's a useful part of the potting mix. And then I've got the old potting soil from last year. So to give that a new lease of life, of course, I've got the usual fish blood and bone. I use a lot of that here. And I've also got some horse compost, which is great. And I'm going to take a look at some homemade compost. So these bins are relatively new. I only added them early last year. And at one point, we moved all of the old compost into the right-hand bin, and it was right up the top. And of course now it's, I don't know, there's only about a third of it left, so it should be in really good condition. I don't tend to have a hot heap here, so it's quite cool, this compost heap. I don't put the effort into maintaining a nice hot composting temperature, but eventually you do end up with nice compost, so I should have something useful there too. Let's take a look. So this stuff is looking very pleasant now. That's not pleasant, don't want that. You can see there are a few weed seeds germinating here. Well, they're not going to develop, but it's not perfect, and that's because it doesn't get hot enough to kill the seeds off. But never mind, this is still a pretty nice material to work with, and it's going to help this old potting soil. It's going to bring a bit more substance to it. So I'm going to use some of that, and I'll use some horse compost here as well. This is a very well rotted horse compost. There's no big lumps in there. It's not smelly or anything like that. This is lovely stuff. This has been hanging around for a while, so that's perfect. I've got some of this sandy loam here. There won't be a huge amount of organic matter in this, but I mean it's a nice material, and I often find that I'm mixing up my own blends for whether it's sowing or potting on, or in this case planting up the potatoes. I often find I've got lots of materials around the garden, whether it's bagged compost or old compost, soil and so on, and on their own they're not ideal for a particular task, but if you mix them together in particular ratios, you'll produce something that's got just the right properties, the right amount of organic matter, the right sort of texture so that it drains appropriately, and so on. So yeah, that stuff will be useful in the right sort of proportion. Probably enough of that for now. Ah, well, that's not clever. Bag's just burst, never mind. Yeah, well, there are still some bits of junk in here, but I don't really care too much about that. I can pick those out. Right. That's coarse organic matter. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Well, this will be fine for the potatoes. Now I want to add a generous handful of fish blood and bone. And give that a good mix. So this mixture now is looking lovely. It's not too heavy. It's got a nice amount of organic matter in it and some feed, and this will produce, I think, a very fine crop of potatoes. But those additions are going to keep this potting soil in good condition, and as long as I don't get anything nasty in these, and I shouldn't do, then I will be reusing this once again in the same way next season. Anyway, on to the job, and this is the easy bit. I put a bit of soil in there, and I'm going to make a hole in the middle, just putting one tuber in each of these, and I'll place the tuber right down the bottom, very close to the bottom. Let me pick a nice one. So the smaller tubers, or those with less chits, I will put in these 15 litre tubs, and I'll put one of the more generously chitted potatoes in the larger pots, but just down the bottom in the centre, and then carefully cover that over. Got to be a little bit gentle with it when those big chits are present, because it's very easy to knock them off. And I'm just going to top this up. Press it down just a little bit, not too much, and I'll give that a good drop of water when I get this in place in the greenhouse. So these will go in the greenhouse, lined up in front of the south-facing wall, where the warmth there is going to hopefully keep these happy. Now, if you're in a hurry, I've sometimes done this, because we'll do 20-25 pots in a go. Sometimes I won't fill them right up, just because I don't have the time for it, and you can fill around them as they grow. Actually, when you're doing it early in the year and there's the chance of frost, it's a good idea to have them filled up, because the compost there will protect the developing shoots from the cold. So right now I'm quite happy to fill these right up, and hopefully we've got enough time today to do all these pots anyway. But if you are in a hurry and you've only got time to mix up half the compost, or only got time to pot half of them up, by all means leave the pot half empty, and as the shoots emerge you can fill around them. The most important part in terms of the composition of the soil is the bottom part here, where you're going to get the root development, and up here it's not so important, the material, because you're not going to get roots developing in this top part. Hopefully you'll get the tubers, but the roots will tend to be in the lower part of the pot. So you can use a nice healthy rich mix in the bottom half of the pot, and then top it up with maybe some of that fluffy compost that I keep getting hold of, something like that. That's not quite as good, but perfectly all right for filling up the rest of the pots. Anyway, that's it really. I've done enough potato videos, as has every other YouTube gardener, so there's not a lot more to say about it, but I did want to sort of give my little tips there on rejuvenating the old potting soil. So I will get these done and in position in the greenhouse. Hopefully we will see those poking through in a few weeks' time, and with a bit of luck the worst of the cold weather should be behind us by the time they emerge. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching. and bye for now.